as we were singing today, sometimes when we're singing these songs, I was almost to say sometimes when we're singing the song, I'm listening to the words, but of course I'm paying attention to the words all the time, but certain words sort of jump out at me. Today while we were singing, a couple of words just kind of sort of leapt out of the songs at me, and I kept noticing in these songs the words peace kept cropping up and trust. Peace and trust kept arising. And I wanted to just comment on that for a moment about the connection between those two things. Sort of alluding to something that Dominic just said about God being with us in the trial, like the three Hebrew children in the fiery furnace, and Nebuchadnezzar still threw them in the fiery furnace, and it wasn't probably their favorite place to be, but God was with them, as you said. And Nebuchadnezzar even said, wait a minute, didn't I throw 3 people in there? How come I see 4? He said, the 4th one looks like the Son of God. That even Nebuchadnezzar said that. And God, you're right, he brought them out, and I think the text says they had no harm, and they didn't even have smell of smoke on their clothes. Isn't that amazing? Anyway, this is in John's Gospel, chapter 16, and verse 33. And this is something Jesus said to his disciples at the end of what we call the Last Supper, when he met with them just before he went to the cross. And he was about to be separated from them. And these are some of his last remarks to them just prior to the events that were about to take place. And he knew that they would have difficulties. He knew that they would be going through some hard times when he was then going to be, after he was separated from them. And here's what he said in verse 33. He said, "These things I have spoken unto you, that in me you might have peace. In the world you shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world," he says. Now the first thing I want to draw your attention to is that 2 things or places that we're in, this expression in. He says, "I've spoken these things to you that in me you might have peace." Now, when he says in me, when we use that word in, we imagine sometimes like inside of something. You might take a baseball and put it inside of a bucket, But it doesn't mean that. That's not what it means in this usage. He doesn't mean inside of me. He means in relation to me, or in connection with me, or some translations say in union with me. We're hooked up to him, you see. We're in a union with him. And by the way, our union with him is based on nothing more on our part than our trust in him, our reliance on him, our faith in him. Because of that, because we trust him, we are in a relationship with him. He could have said it this way. This is another way to express the same thing. By virtue of your relationship with me, you have peace. That's another way to say it. Because we're in a relationship with him, he says, because of that, I've spoken these things to you so that you'd know that because of your relationship with me, you can have peace. That's what he's saying. Then he goes on to say, in the world, that's the other in. See, we're in a relationship with Christ. We don't see him. We don't perceive him with our physical senses, but nevertheless, we're in a relationship with him. One of the disciples, in one of the other Gospels, it tells us that while Jesus, after his resurrection, he came and appeared to the disciples as they met together to try to figure out what was going on, and he appeared in their midst and talked with them. But one of them was absent that day. Thomas, he was not there. And when he came back, they said, "Guess what, Thomas? Jesus was here." And, he didn't believe it. He was skeptical. And not only was he skeptical, he said, "Unless I see the print of the nails in his hands." See, he saw him crucified. He saw them hang him up on that cross and nail those nails in his hands. And he says, basically, he was saying, "You're telling me that guy Jesus I saw hung up on that cross and die, and they stuck a spear in his side, and you're saying you saw him and he is alive. He said, unless I see that print of the nail in his hands and put my hand into that wound in his side, unless I can experience that, then I won't believe it. He's kind of stubborn, that way. Not to say, he's the only one that's ever been stubborn, but that's kind of his point of view. And so a while later, the disciples are all gathering together. And by the way, the reason they were gathering together was because they didn't know what was going on, They did not yet understand what was happening. They were going to come to understand, but they were meeting together to try to sort all this out, and then Jesus came and appeared again. First thing he said, Thomas. Yeah, he knew what Thomas had said. He said, Thomas, of course, amazed by this time, and he said, my Lord and my God. And he said, Thomas, because you have seen me, you've believed. But he said, blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. Now, who he had in mind when he said that was us. Now, he was kind of using Thomas as an example. He said, because you saw me, now you believe. But he said, the blessed are those who haven't seen him and yet believe. That's who he's talking to here. You and I. We don't see him. We don't perceive him. Yet we believe in him. We put our trust in him. And Jesus says here, the things I've spoken to you, I've said these things so that you can have peace. He wants us to have peace of mind and have peace in this world. He says, in the world, as long as you're in the world, you'll have tribulation. The word tribulation just means pressure. And I think we can all verify that that's true. Can anybody say that, well, throughout my life, I've never had any pressure? No, we all experience unpleasant things. Tribulation means trouble or pressure. And I think we can all verify that that's the case. And he is also confirming that. As long as you're in the world, you'll have tribulation or trouble. Dominic, he's working with Rhema. I went to Rhema in Tulsa in Broken Arrow. And I guess you went there too, right, Dominic? Yeah, you and Cammie and all. And I remember Kenneth Hagin, the man who started Rhema, I remember one of the things that he said about this. He said in the early part of his ministry, before he was so well known, he would go to churches and preach, and then after the church service, he would ask if anybody needed prayer for anything, just come up to the front, and he'd pray with them one at a time individually. And he said this first lady in the line, when he said, how can I pray for you? She began to cry, and she said, I just want you to pray for me that I won't have any more trouble. So he said, I put my hand on her head, and I said, oh, God, kill her right now. She said, no, that's not what I said. And he said, well, that's the only way you're not going to have any more trouble. In heaven, there's no trouble, you see. In heaven, there's no more problems. There's no issues. It's part of this world. It's part of this physical world and your physical body interacting with this physical world. That's where the source of all the trouble is and the problems. But Jesus here says, he acknowledges that. He says, as long as you're in this world, there's going to be friction. That's another way to say it. There's going to be difficulties. There's going to be things that are unpleasant. But listen to what he says next, but be of good cheer. Now, if it had been anybody but Jesus saying that, we'd be tempted to have a bad response. Don't you like it when you're having a hard time and somebody says, oh, cheer up, oh, yeah, I'll show you cheer up. That's kind of how we react. But Jesus knows what he's talking about. He's speaking from a position of knowing what he's talking about, you see. He knows both sides of the issue. He knows both heavenly things and earthly things. And out of that knowledge, he says, yes, in this world, you're going to face some difficulties. But be of good cheer. Or in other words, you've got something to be happy about, to be cheerful about. He says, be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. Now that's just another way of saying, you are in a relationship with me and I'm bigger than any problem you're ever going to face. He says that. You know why he said that? He told you right there in this verse, so that you can have peace, so that you can relax in your mind and have peace. And you can say to yourself, I don't care what comes. I don't care what comes down the road. He's big enough to handle anything. He says, I've overcome the world. The world's the source of your problems. I've overcome the world. I'm bigger than the world. There's nothing that will ever confront you that is too big for him. There's no problems too big for him. And his intent of telling us this today and here is so that we can, in our minds, we can rest. He wants you to have rest and peace in your mind, and it comes out of, it's an outgrowth of our reliance and our trust in him. Now, in this same, this is chapter 16. Let's go back to the beginning of this little discussion and look at what he started with. When he began in chapter 14, just look at the first thing he says here. You see, this tells us, you know what I say is, when you want to understand what a certain passage in the Bible is talking about, look at how it starts and look at how it ends, and those bookends will tell you what everything in between is all about. He just got through telling them, I want you to have peace, right? He said, in the world you'll have trouble, but I've said these things to you that in me you'll have peace. The very first thing he says in chapter 14, let not your heart be troubled. Does that sound like in me you have peace? Yeah, it's the same thought, isn't it? Let not your heart be troubled. You know, he's saying this not only to them, but to us as well. And you know, if a human being says this to you, you might be tempted to say, yeah, but you don't know what I'm going through. People have said that to me many times. You don't know, you know, and I don't know. But he knows. See, I don't know. I can't perceive anything outside of myself, of course. We sympathize, of course, with one another. But see, he knows exactly what we're going through. And out of that knowledge, he says, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. Now, again, I try to point this out every time I come across this word believe. In New Testament usage, you know, when we read these words in English, they come from Greek words in which this text was first written. And in the Greek language, the word that's translated for us, believe, means more than our English word believe, in which we think believe just means mentally agree that something is true. But in the Greek language, and I think you can see this when I say it in the context, it implies an element of trust as well, reliance, confidence. That's what it means. Let not your heart be troubled. You trust in God. Trust me too. That's what he's saying. You have confidence in God. Place your confidence in me. That's what he's saying. We are placing reliance and trust in him. And that's the source of our peace. Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. This is really wonderful. He's not say, you notice he doesn't say, now if you do everything just right, well, maybe there's a 50-50 chance you might make it. No, he says, you're trusting in God, trust me, I'm going to go prepare a place for you. He doesn't tell them to do anything, did he, except trust him. It's him that prepares the place. I will prepare a place for you, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. You notice, what comes across to me in this is, he's the one doing all the work. He's the one saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. The only thing he told them to do, the person receiving this message, and I say it that way because he didn't mean just them, but he says this to us as well. The only thing he asks of the person receiving this message is trust. Did you notice that? He didn't tell you to do it. He didn't tell you anything to do except to trust him, to rely on him. I will go. I will prepare. I will come. I will receive you to myself, so that where I am, there you may be also. In this same chapter, in chapter 14, it comes up again. This idea of let not your heart be troubled, of peace. This is a big thought with him. You know, when he repeats it over and over again, you think he's trying to emphasize it. Verse 27, Torrin, if you could give me that, in the same chapter. Again, he brings it up again. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give unto you. You know, one thing talked about peace like, we kind of understand it, or peace based on I'm trying to relax, I'm trying to have peace of mind. But you see, he says, my peace I give with you. Now I'll tell you one thing. When you read about Jesus in the Gospels, have you ever noticed Jesus never gets ruffled by anything? You ever notice that by that? He never does say, oh man, you disciples, you just leave me alone for a while. I'm about to pull my hair out. Do you ever read that about Jesus? No, you don't ever read that. He's never, he just never seems to be caught off guard or taken by surprise, or, nothing ever knocks him over, like happens with us. It makes you think that he knew something we don't know. Almost you'd kind of think that. So he says, again, remember, he's speaking to us from a perspective of a higher knowledge than we have. You know what he knows that we don't necessarily always have in our thinking? He knows the heart of God. Not just how big God is, not just how powerful he is, but what his heart is. He knows the heart of God. He knows that God is not indifferent, that he's not off doing something else, that he's not distracted, that he has his eye on us all the time. Jesus is the one that said, a sparrow can't even fall from the ground without God noticing it. How much more do you think he knows what's going on with your life? He even says, the hairs of your head are numbered. That's how aware he is. That's just a way of saying God knows what's going on in your life. He says, peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you, not as the world gives. You know what kind of peace the world has? The peace that the world has is when there's a cessation of trouble, then I can have peace. When there's no more problems. Like that woman I talked, pray for me that I won't have any more trouble. Well, Jesus has a peace that's bigger than that. Jesus has a peace that is bigger than the trouble, that overwhelms the trouble, that cannot be overcome by any problems. It's bigger than any problem, and it's present with us at all times. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you, not as the world gives, give I. Notice this language again. He doesn't tell you to do it. I give. I leave with you. I give to you. Let not your heart be troubled. Boy, that sounds familiar. Did we read that somewhere earlier? When he says something twice, that makes me think he really wants us to get that. Let not your heart be troubled. Yeah, but you don't know what I'm facing. Well, I as a human being don't know, but he does. He knows all about it. And from that perspective, he says, let not your heart be troubled. Neither let it be afraid. If you contemplate this and give it serious thought, you can be fearless in life. You don't have anything to be afraid of. You don't have anything to worry about. You don't have anything to be concerned about. No cause for alarm, because the one that's bigger than anything we might ever face is telling us, don't let your heart be troubled. Don't be afraid. It sounds to me like he's got everything under control if we'll trust him. That's the only thing. That's the only thing he's asking for, is our trust, is our reliance, our confidence in him. And I have to say that is a choice we've got to make. We must make that choice. And it's easy. All you have to say is, I choose to trust you. I choose to place my faith in you, put all my confidence in you. No matter what this situation is, I know you can handle it. I know you can deal with it. I don't have to figure everything out. I'm just going to place my trust in you and rest. Oh, but by the way, one more thing I want to read before I'm done. On this idea of rest, peace of mind, that's what that reminds me of. This is in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 11. I love this passage, and it just occurred to me that I haven't read this for a while, so this is one of my favorite passages. Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. Torrin's going to get it for you. Appreciate you, Torrin, doing this work. Torrin does a good job. And I'll tell you what, if I had to do this computer stuff, I don't know if I could do it, because I'm not sure how to make all that work, but yeah, there we go. So Jesus here says, come to me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Now right away, what it sounds to me like he's saying here is, you've got burdens, you've got heavy things you may be carrying, but here's his invitation. Come to me, and I'll take that away from you and give you rest. Again, a person might say, yeah, but you don't know what I'm facing. That's true, I don't, but he does. And he says, come to me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, I'll give you rest. That's a pretty word, isn't it? Don't you like that word? I do. I like that word. I don't think he means necessarily physical, your physical body, That's one thing, to lie down and take a nap on the couch. But that's not what he means here. He means on the inside, where all the turmoil is, where all the worry is, where all the stress is, where all the fear is. In here. He says, come to me with all that. Take it out here, give it to him, and I'll give you rest. That's what he's saying. He says, take my yoke upon you. By the way, we were talking a minute ago about how he said, I've said these things to you that in me you might have peace. And I said that in me means in relation to him, in union with him, in the fact that we are a participant with him, that we're hooked up with him by our faith in him. That's what the yoke means here. A yoke is something used to hook two animals together. Now, thank goodness we don't have to do that really, in farm work today. I have enough trouble driving tractors and stuff, but if I had to hook two animals together, I think I would just throw in the towel. I don't know if I could deal with that. I mean, it's hard enough the way it is. But the yoke is, I've seen it in pictures. It's this wooden deal they put across the backs of these animals, and they hook them together. You get the picture? It joins two things together. And by that, he means, in a metaphorical way, he's referring to our relationship with him. Come into a relationship with me. And that's what he means by take my yoke upon you and learn from me. There's all kinds of things we learn from him. About the heart of God, about what God's really like. We learn from Jesus about God's nature, about the fact that he's not mad at all, he's not upset, he's not demanding, he's not mean, he's not indifferent. We learn all those things. And listen to what he says here. Take my yoke, get hooked up with me. Learn from me, learn of me. For I am meek and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. That's what he says. Now get this. Remember, the yoke symbolizes and represents our relationship with him. Verse 30. My yoke is easy. My burden is light. You wouldn't think so because I'm such a nice person. You wouldn't think anybody would have a problem with me. But I've had people get mad. Seriously. And I'm not joking about that. You're just trying to make it easy. That's what. Well, you know what? I'm just reading from the Bible. It wasn't me that said this. It wasn't me that put these words in the Bible. But it is me taking it seriously and repeating it. He says, my yoke is easy. The yoke represents our Christian life. He means for it to be easy. You know why he can say, my yoke is easy, my burden is light? Because he intends to do all the hard part. He intends to do the heavy lifting. He intends to do the difficult things. You know what he wants? He just wants us to walk along with him through life. Just like Dominic was saying a while ago, the children of Israel, they had some difficulties. The people in the fiery furnace had some difficulties. Daniel in the lion's den. But he walked with them through all of that. And he walks with us. That's what he's saying here. He says, just walk along with me. It's easy and it's light. Now these words are great in the King James. I love this in the King James translation. But even more, or along with that, I guess I should say, I love what the Message translation has in verse 28, 29, and 30. So, Torrin, would you go back to 28 and give me the Message? He says, are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Again, I like this because it seems like a TV commercial. I can picture Jesus on TV. Are you tired, worn out? He says, come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. Isn't that wonderful what he says here? Get away with me and you'll recover your life. What I get here, what comes across to me in this is, it's so opposite from what we sometimes assume that Christianity is about. He's not saying, I've got things for you to do, I've got tasks for you, I've got obligations and burdens for you. Just the opposite. He says, get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Okay, Torrin, let's get the next one. Listen to this. Walk with me. You see, that's all. Just walk along with him. Let him walk with you in your life. He'll walk with you through all the things that you deal with and face in your life. Walk with me, work with me, watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. Isn't that a great thought? Nothing phony or artificial about it. It's unforced. It's natural. The unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. I like that too. I had an impression when I was growing up. It wasn't right, but sometimes we get misconceptions. I had this idea, just from hearing people talk, about kind of the opposite of what Dominic was talking about when he was talking about being in Egypt. I'd hear missionaries talk about how terrible it was and how awful it was. And I got this idea, it kind of grew in my mind, that you better stay away from this God, because if you get too close to him, he's going to send you to some place that's totally, where you're completely out of place, You're going to be in Africa sitting on a dirt floor eating insects, or something like that. Something unsuited, But see, what I didn't realize is that he knew me better than I knew me. He knows you better than you know you. And he says, I won't put anything ill-fitting on you. He knows what fits us. He knows what suits us. He knows what we're designed for, what we're made for, what is perfectly suited to our unique person. Christianity is not a one-size-fits-all conformity thing. It's individually tailored, because you are an individual. Each one of us are, and he tailors our relationship with him to us as individuals. He says, I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. And the last verse is very good too. I'll end with that one. Go ahead, Torin, let's get the next one. Keep company with me and you'll learn how to live freely and lightly. Don't you like those words? Freely and lightly. That's a good motto to have. Again, you might say, yeah, but you don't know what I've got to deal with. That's right, me as an individual, I don't know, but he knows. He knows what we've got to deal with, and yet he says to us, walk with me and you will learn how to live freely and lightly. That's kind of the impression I get when I read the Gospels of Jesus, about him not being troubled or upset or ruffled by anything. He's living a free and a light life because he's got his confidence in God. And he says, same thing about God. You trust in God, trust also in me. That's all. It's very simple, I think. He just says, walk along with me, and I'll take care of everything. Okay, that's all I got today. Let's all stand up.